great line of questioning. We look forward to working with you, too, going forward. And to our panelists, thank you again for your expertise. And I don't get the chance to sort of dig a little deeper. Hope you don't mind sticking around for a while. Let's start with this issue of targeting scientists of Chinese descent. Earlier, Mr. Brown, you addressed this by saying, from the FBI point of view, your investigations are not based on ethnicity. That's the word that you used. Let me ask some of the other panelists as well. Dr. Lauer, you and your colleagues have conducted a lot of investigations of grant applications that failed to disclose foreign conflicts of interest and commitment. Is it your assessment that Chinese talent recruitment programs only target scientists and researchers of Chinese descent?
No.
Haven't some of the most egregious cases you have found involve scientists and researchers who are not of Chinese descent?
Yes.
I think that's important to get on the record. That's certainly what we found in our investigation. Dr. Kaiser, is it your assessment that the Chinese government only is targeting scientists or researchers of Chinese descent?
No, sir.
Dr. Fall, same question for you.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Let me ask you, Mr. Brown, because that might be confusing to some people. So why don't you tell us who you think the Chinese government and through the talent recruitment program are targeting? Who are they looking for?
So, sir, from our experience, I mean, they're looking for individuals who have access to information that's of value to their plans and their strategies moving forward, pure and simple. Yep. That is what they're trying to do, is build out towards their plan and strategy towards 2049.
So it can be researchers and scientists of whatever, as you said earlier, ethnicity or nationality.
Yes, sir.
It's more about what they have access to and what they are looking for. Another misconception, I think, is I've talked to some of my colleagues about this issue, is that China is identifying people in China and then sending them to our universities. That's not the case, is it?
No, sir, it's not.
And why is that not the case? Why are they targeting those people who are already here doing important research?
So they're targeting people over here because they're already established, right, and they have access to
Established doing the research that they want.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So it's really much more effective, cost-effective.
It is.
And much more efficient, I suppose, to go after people who are here already doing research, including research funded by the $150 billion a year that our taxpayers are providing. Let's talk a little about the contract. We put the poster up of the contract. And I appreciate the fact that earlier Dr. Kaiser said that she was glad we were making people aware of these contracts. This is an example of a Chinese talent plan contract that we were able to access. We'll talk in a moment about my frustration we weren't able to access more of those contracts. But let me ask you, Mr. Brown, first, what is the FBI's assessment of the impact these contracts have on U.S.-based researchers and scientists?
The impact is significant because it basically forces the researcher to adhere to the contract with the Chinese government, so it's significant.
And you have before you the copy of that poster, so you can see some of the specific provisions that violate U.S. research values, incentivize unethical and possibly illegal behavior. I'd like to point out some of the differences between the U.S.-funded research and the Chinese-funded research. Provision 1 states, as you can see, that the talent plan member is bound by Chinese law, and a commitment is made not to interfere with China's internal affairs. It says, and I'm reading, shall observe relevant laws and regulations of the People's Republic of China and shall not interfere in China's internal affairs. Mr. Brown, why does the FBI believe the Chinese government has that provision in its contracts?
Obviously, sir, they want them to adhere to the requirements within China. They're adhering to the Communist Party doctrine while they're working in China.
One thing I've heard is that this is often used as leverage over researchers to ensure that they follow through on these contracts. Would that be accurate?
Yes, sir, it would be.
Dr. Lauer, and I guess for Dr. Kaiser, Dr. Fall, and Dr. Lauer, all three of you, if you could just answer yes or no, do your researchers sign contracts requiring them not to interfere in U.S. internal affairs?
Not that I know of.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay. Dr. Lauer, would you like to amend your answer?
No.
Thank you. You're not a lawyer, you're a medical doctor. You can actually answer the question. But it's so ridiculous that, you know, of course not, is the answer, right? Is it in line with U.S. research values to agree to abide by Chinese law in conducting U.S. taxpayer-funded research for all three of you?
No, sir, it's not in line.
No.
Lauer, Dr. Paul. Dr. Kaiser, do NSF researchers sign contracts requiring them not to be involved in internal affairs and to not reveal that they have signed a contract with you?
Not at all.
Okay. The subcommittee found that these talent contracts often included these non-disclosure provisions, which prevent the disclosure from participation. Look at item 8 there. It says, and I quote, "shall not disclose the contract to unrelated parties without consent." Dr. Lauer, do you read that provision to mean that researchers who are doing U.S.-funded research are not able to disclose to U.S. agencies or universities that they are receiving payments from Chinese talent recruitment programs?
Yes, and that means they can't disclose it to NIH either.
Right. In your investigations that you've done, have you seen similar provisions in Chinese contracts?
Yes.
And all three of you, I guess, are your researchers forbidden from acknowledging the fact that the U.S. government has funded their research?
Au contraire.
Yes, exactly. In fact, the opposite.
I have to be a little cautious, sir, because the Department of Energy does a lot of highly classified research as well. So modulo that, the answer is no.
Okay. And that's understandable. Dr. Fall, let's follow up on DOE. Given that talent plan members are sometimes contractually forbidden from disclosing their participation in a program, do you believe Energy's recent directive for employees and contractors to self-disclose their affiliation will be followed?
Well, I have to be honest, it remains to be seen. We have the directive in place, and so
Yeah, I just, again, to Senator Romney's point, particularly the fact that with regard to the Thousand Talents program, they've sort of gone underground now. You know, they were up online a year and a month ago, and now they've taken it underground. So it's tough for us to have the transparency we had before to enable the FBI and others to do their work. So I think it may be naive to think that a directive to self-disclose is going to be followed. By the way, our investigation also found that some contract provisions stated that intellectual property created by the talent plan member was the property of the Chinese institution, even if the research overlapped with U.S.-funded research. Dr. Lauer, has that been your experience in looking at some of these contracts?
Yes.
Look at item 2 there. Intellectual property rights, including copyright, patent rights, trademark rights, are owned by the Chinese institution. Mr. Brown, why would the Chinese government want to include provisions on intellectual property in a talent recruitment contract?
They recognize that the researcher that they have recruited is actually probably stealing some of the theft, stealing some of their proprietary information and then using it to their benefit.
Is that in the interest of the United States?
No.
Thank you. Let me ask about NSF funding, Dr. Kaiser, just so we're all, again, people may be watching this are not sure where this U.S. tax dollar goes. What's supposed to happen to products of fundamental research created under these NSF-funded grants?
We actually are mandated to make all products of fundamental research open and available. And they need to credit NSF for funding these projects.
Yep. And in effect, credit the taxpayers. Yeah. Finally, our investigation found contracts with provisions that required talent plan members to recruit other researchers to be part of the team, effectively expanding the scope of the members' researcher and influence. Point 6 on there, item number 6, quote, focus on recruiting 1 to 2 postdoctoral students each year. Again, Dr. Lauer, is that something you've seen in other contracts as well?
Yes, we have.
Yeah. So it's a recruitment requirement as well. Again, Dr. Takashi, you said earlier that you think making people aware of these contracts is a good idea, and I appreciate you saying that. I will say for all of you, particularly NIH, NSF, and DOE, What's preventing you from releasing more of these contracts to us? We tried very hard to get more contracts to be able to understand this better. I chose not to subpoena you for additional contracts because we had enough in conjunction with your testimony to get a flavor for it. But I do think that your willingness to give us more of these contracts would be very helpful. I think, Mr. Brown, the answer is going to be that the FBI discouraged them from doing so. That's certainly our experience. Could you just comment on that briefly?
Sir, I don't know that specifically, but I will go back and look at it and get back to you.
Okay. The subcommittee learned that these talent recruitment programs also have established shadow labs often in China. We mentioned that earlier briefly, but we haven't gotten into that yet. These labs are typically undisclosed and designed to conduct nearly identical research in parallel with the U.S.-funded research in the United States. Dr. Lauer, again, you've looked at some of these. Most U.S.-funded research is designed to be published openly, as Dr. Kaiser has said. Why is it advantageous for the Chinese government to run these shadow labs in China?
This way they get priority. They are able to know what's happening in an American laboratory before the rest of the world does. One commentary I saw said it's an opportunity to avoid making mistakes. By knowing what the mistakes are, you don't make them, and that way you get a head start and you're able to get to the answer faster than anybody else.
In effect, leapfrogging.
Yes, exactly.
The U.S. research, but taking advantage, again, of the taxpayer-paid research. Can you describe what you've uncovered as it relates to shadow labs in China more broadly? Are the U.S.-based institutions typically aware that the researchers have these shadow labs in China?
Actually, what's particularly striking is that many of the American institutions had no idea that, that their own faculty had a laboratory in China or were spending substantial time in a foreign country. They became aware of this only by virtue of the fact that the government came asking.
As we've asked questions in this investigation, we have found exactly that. In fact, one case that comes to mind is a major U.S. university that did not realize that the scientist in question had gone back to China and spent the summer in a shadow lab in China. No clue. I think these shadow labs also, would be fair to surmise, are in place to act as an incentive. In other words, it's not just that they're paying individuals. They're saying, we'll set you up with a first-class lab in China. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. To Dr. Lauer, Dr. Fall, and Dr. Kaiser, just generally, again, setting the table here, how quickly has China's science and technology capabilities developed over the past, let's say, 10 years? How quickly?
Incredibly quickly. We have found that the number of Chinese publications and the amount of funding has increased immensely. And as you said, it has been over the past 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Lauer?
Yes, agree with that.
Dr. Paul?
And I would add, it's not just about papers, it's about areas where I think we believe that they're closing in on the quality of the research with us.
And this goes to the point I made earlier about talking to this individual at a senior level in government who believes that some of the impacts of what we've seen in the last 20 years really is maybe yet to be seen, particularly on the military side. So 4 months ago, the FBI Office of Private Sector formed a team dedicated to outreach to universities, colleges. That didn't exist before 4 months ago. I'm glad you did it. How will the FBI now better coordinate its messaging across the 56 field offices to ensure that the tailored threat information is being conveyed to our research institutions?
So now I will say that through our Office of Private Sector, I mean, they are engaging daily now with the academic associations and working with the 56 field offices. The SACs, the ASACs, the agents, the analysts within those field offices become the FBI's point of message to the universities. So we're confident with that model that we will continue to get our message out. Clearly, I think our message, as your report indicated, needs to be more synchronized, needs to be more tailored, but we are committed through the Office of Private Sector. And quite frankly, I created an engagement office to work with the private sector and just created it to ensure that we are getting our message out as needed.
Yeah. Again, as was said earlier on the panel, awareness, transparency is critical. But it's not enough. for you to contact a university, as an example, and make them aware of the fact that there are members of these talent recruitment programs who are researchers there, is a good thing. But the question is, what's the follow-up? You said earlier that you encourage them to take action, but you don't require them to take action. Among the solutions that have been discussed today and that we've looked at, and as I mentioned at the outset, this subcommittee is known for digging deeply into something and then actually coming up with something constructive, bipartisan, to address it. And we've had some success with that. One idea is to simply require that all these federal grant applications be harmonized, be uniform, because there are differences even among the three of you and others as well. How do you feel about that, so that we have clarification on what the grant applications ought to look like?
We are, we agree with that as well, and we are moving towards that point in a couple of ways. I think, as was pointed out in the written testimony, we, NSF, are adopting NIH's form for disclosure of biographical information, and we are developing a web-based form for disclosure of all sources of support, current and pending support, that both NIH and Department of Energy would like to adopt as well. So we're moving towards standardization, as well as talking about more ways to do that through the OSTP committee that you mentioned. We welcome any ideas for further standardization, absolutely. Dr.
Lauer.
I totally agree, and just as NSF is leveraging NIH's software technology for biosketches, we will be leveraging the work that they're doing on disclosure of outside research support.
Dr. Fall?
Yeah, we're coordinating as well, and I would say that you mentioned the very good point that self-disclosure isn't the answer to all the problems, but oftentimes we see that the self-disclosure is different to different agencies, and that's where commonality of forms and processes starts to uncover suggestions of impropriety.
Yeah. Another one, which is about collaboration between you all and other federal agencies, is just requiring information sharing. And I know some of that has started to go on. I mentioned the White House Office, Science and Technology, hoping to open up more communication. But when you have an investigation in your agency, do the other agencies know about it? When you have chosen to terminate a grant fund, do you share that information? Do you disclose conflicts of interest? I assume there's some overlap with some of the researchers and scientists. Is that information being shared already, and if not, should it be?
Information on active investigations. The active investigations are occurring by our Office of Inspector General, and so that is not shared, often is not shared even with us as an agency for obvious reasons. Information on debarments and suspensions. I believe we do share among the grant agencies to make sure that we are consistent in that.
That's not required, but you, as a practice, you're starting to do that. Is that your answer?
I think there are some U.S. government-wide debarments. So obviously, for that reason, we would share those. When it's an agency debarment, we share that information. I believe it's voluntarily. There's no requirement, but we definitely do share that information.
Dr. Lauer?
I think we are sharing more information now than we were in times past, particularly on specific cases. We also are working, we have software that by which agencies can share information about grants applications with one another. One of the reasons why we do that is to avoid inadvertent duplicate publication funding, and that's something that we're doing more of.
Another one which I think you, Mr. Ramatowski, asked us to look into at the end of your opening statement is what additional authorities you could have to be able to properly vet. We heard in our investigation that U.S. university officials are relying on you, relying on the State Department to vet foreign research for intellectual property theft. So they feel like they don't have to do it because you're doing it. And yet, as we looked into it, very, very rarely does state deny a visa related to intellectual property theft. Do you need additional authorities to be more effective at this, to be able to vet foreign researchers before issuing a visa?
Yes, Senator, we would like to work with you and the committee to close gaps in the authority that have been identified, not only state authority, but other agencies also.
Okay. Well, those are some areas where I think there could be a fruitful legislative and regulatory response. Let me ask you a broader question, which is probably on the minds of people who are listening today or watching. Why should any federally funded research go to somebody who is a member of a talent recruitment program? Dr. Lauer. Dr. Kaiser looked at you, so
Yeah. I think the real concern is why should any money go to any researcher who's not being open, honest, transparent, and playing by the rules? There's an established set of norms and rules that have been in place for many decades by which the biomedical and the scientific enterprise runs. And I think we would all be agreed that we should not be supporting scientists who are unethical and willfully breaking rules.
well, in that case, anybody that signs one of these contracts, as we've seen here, would be in that category, by definition.
Yeah.
Dr. Fall?
I agree.
Dr. Kaiser?
I think the challenge that we have is exactly as you stated in your report. These contracts are going underground. They also are evolving and changing. And so part of the concern we have is keeping up with understanding what people are signing and what the terms are that they are signing. And that's why we do definitely need the help of our FBI partners in that regard.
Well, that brings us to our final question. Good segue. And I think, Mr. Brown, we're going to ask you about this, but our report looked at just one of China's more than 200 talent recruitment programs. It's the best known one and maybe the largest one. We're not sure. Again, their goal was to have a couple thousand people. Now they have 7,000 people. So they've exceeded their expectations on this. We know that a lot of the efforts we talked about this morning were based on the information that was publicly available online until just last year. And frankly, a lot of our work is based on information that was publicly available. The Chinese government has now deleted that information and has issued directives to its research institutions not to talk about these programs publicly anymore, to any of you, and certainly not to us. So how can we be confident that the FBI will have the capability to detect, assess, and mitigate the risks with China's talent plans, or the next one after that? And are you prepared to evolve your efforts as the Chinese government changes its tactics?
Yes, sir. As it comes to this, I would say that the team that we have that's been focused on this, and I know your team met with them, we have turned the corner when it comes to the talent plan problem. But at the same time, as we recognize, we have to have other means to discover talent plan members, and we are working that, whether it's through the USIC, whether it's with our partners at this table. We recognize that we need to develop that. We are developing that. I can't go into specifics of exactly what we're doing, but we know that we need to have target discovery more than ever now because of the going underground.
So you're not able to tell us how you're going to deal with this now that contracts are not publicly disclosing their membership?
So we can discuss ways we can find additional talent plan members, but I prefer not to do it in an open forum.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know I would be interested, I know Senator Carper would as well, to have the opportunity to be with you in a classified setting to talk about that.
Absolutely.
Because it's clearly a challenge, and if we can be helpful, I think that's important as well. Do you think your agencies are prepared? Dr. Kaiser, are you prepared as this threat evolves?
Frankly, this threat is evolving so quickly, and we were just made aware of it so recently, in 2018, that we are taking the steps to be as prepared as we can be to this point. But frankly, we can do more. We know we can do more, and we need to coordinate among the interagency on what additionally we need to do.
Yeah, I just must say one thing. I was tempted to say this earlier in response to your notion that you just learned about it last year, which I don't dispute, but it's been out there for 20 years.
It has.
And certainly since 2008, it's been very publicly out there.
Absolutely.
And, you know, China hasn't tried to hide the ball. I mean, they have said they're going after your taxpayer-funded research.
That's right.
Why did you not know about it till last year?
I think, again, because we're an open science funding agency, this is such a different kind of threat of taking advantage of our values and the openness and transparency that it was just so hard to understand. So we're very grateful to our FBI and Inspector General partners for bringing it to our attention. It was quite recent because often a lot of these things are not in the area of being illegal, but they are against research integrity and they're unethical. So this is a different kind of threat that we're getting to understand.
Thank you for your candor. Dr. Lauer, are you prepared?
I think we're much better prepared than we were a while back, and we have a lot more work to do.
Dr. Fall?
So first, I'd just like to echo Dr. Kaiser that this is so contrary to fundamental scientific values that it's hard to get your head around that this is being done to you. In terms of the Department of Energy, I think we're already looking beyond the talent programs and not using that as a screen. We've developed, along with our laboratories, a risk matrix for technologies that are national security relevant or economic security relevant, and you can imagine a sort of stoplight chart about technologies and countries of risks and whether our national laboratories will be willing to work with people will be viewed through that lens.
Well, you mentioned that earlier, and if you're willing, the subcommittee would like to find out more about that risk matrix and how that maybe could be used in other agencies as well, understanding that you have more classified research than most. Again, I just want to thank the witnesses for being here today. It's a complicated issue, a very important issue for our future and really for the future of the globe. You know, this notion of our rules of integrity and transparency and collaboration has been essential to, as Dr. Lauer said earlier, some of the huge advances, as an example, in the health of not just Americans, but citizens all around the globe. It's been extraordinary. And in a sense, that's at risk as well. So this is not just about taking our secrets and using them often, in effect, against us economically and militarily, but it's about also what is the ethic here? You know, what is the standard and who's going to set it? It's clear that the threat China's talent recruitment programs pose to U.S. research is one where we need a stronger and more coordinated response. It's also clear to me that this threat's not going away. I think it's going to only increase unless we do things differently. With the 1,000 talent plan going underground, again, China's going to likely change how it attempts to gain access to our research institutions. We have to be nimble. We have to understand that it's going to evolve. We've got to be prepared for whatever form this threat takes going forward. I certainly stand ready to work with you all and others to be sure we are helping our federal agencies fully address this threat from China and therefore helping our research institutions. We want to do it in a thoughtful, bipartisan way, and I think my colleagues on this subcommittee you saw here today all want to get at the same issue. So I think we can work together to come up with some help for you at the legislative level. And I look forward to working with our partners in the executive branch and the administration to ensure that we're better prepared to protect America's research equities. Again, I thank you for being here today. The hearing record will remain open for 15 days for any additional comments you might have or questions of any of the subcommittee members. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.